On behalf of History UK and all our dedicated volunteers, I extend my heartfelt greetings to each one of you. May I request Sai Deepak ji to please come and join us here.
I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizers, PCUK, for putting together this wonderful event. And I'm grateful to the audience, members of the audience, for having turned up on the weekend. So for the last 1.5 years or so, I've been frequenting the Bay Area of the United States. Almost every 45 days I'm there for some work or another. And I must say that I thought that perhaps the crowd there was vibrant. Leicester and Manchester have changed my view. So the 30th of May was the last working day of the Delhi High Court. So by the time I was done with my work, it was close to about 5:30, 6 o'clock. And I barely had the time to shave, pack or shop. So by the time I boarded the flight was at 2 o'clock. I reached the airport around, I think, for 11:30 or 12. And this was a 10-hour flight, which I think is a middle flight in the sense it's not the 22-hour flight, it's the 16-hour flight that you're used to in the United States, or a shorter flight. So I wasn't sure if I was supposed to sleep or not. So by the time I landed, I was in a sleep-deprived condition. From there, we drove directly to Leicester, and our event was around 4:30. In that sleep-deprived condition, the speaker expects the energy of the audience to lift his morale and spirits, and I had such a fantastic audience there. The gathering, the quality of the audience, the energy, the kind of questions that were put. I can say that there is a lot of hope, and when we think of saving you guys, I think you don't need us to save you at all, you can save yourself. So I had a fantastic time in terms of quality engagement with members of the community in Leicester. I had a different agenda or a different topic to address there. I want to touch upon a few issues here which I think are of consequence from an India-UK relations perspective. Notwithstanding the fact that our histories may have started on a slightly different note, ultimately what I think history has done is that they have come to realize who we are, and we have come to understand the value of what they have to offer. Perhaps there is some kind of a give and take between the East and the West, which this relationship signifies to the West of the Middle East. And the fact that the Indian community is perhaps the model minority wherever it goes certainly works to our advantage and speaks volumes of our civilizational dignity and the innate qualities of as law-abiding citizens. I want to focus on 2 or 3 aspects here and then I'll open it up for questions. Why should the India-UK relationship matter? What are the common values that perhaps the parties to this relationship share? 3, how is it that we as a community can strengthen that particular relationship? 4, what can India do to strengthen your presence here? I think these are the broad questions to be addressed. I am told that 60% of global finance is still routed through this part of the world. And this country still remains in the elite league of countries which are called the first world countries, whether we like it or not, it remains a fact. And this country has by and large been an epitome of political stability, a certain degree of calmness that is associated with it. The degree of volatility that you see in the rest of Europe, or perhaps on the other side of the Atlantic, you don't see it here. For all practical purposes, this country has managed to keep its ship afloat and stable. And since this also happens to be an important strategic location from a geopolitical perspective or an international relations perspective, India has a lot more stake in making its presence felt within the power structures and within the influential think tanks of the United Kingdom. Because if it does not do so, that vacuum will be filled up by those forces which are inimical to Bharat. So there is a very clear strategic imperative for us to invest. Two, over the years what has happened is, even if it's grudging, both parties have come to recognize the contributions that each has to make at the negotiating table, one way or another. We represent wherever we go among the finest technical workforces that the world has to offer. In my view, and I say this with no degree or iota of jingoism, the Indian brain is second to none. When it comes to technology or matters of importance, we have the best, we have among the best at the very least. That is something that they have realized. And perhaps the fact that we have a shared education system or a broad curriculum which is more or less the same, or at least the structure of the approach remains the same, perhaps has a lot to do with respect to our ability to mingle, mix, and become part of the society. And that most of us are comfortable with English certainly is an advantage. Three, while some may want us to believe that democracy is a Western import, or it is the contribution of the West, civilizationally, if there is a society that has always been geared towards democracy and has had trappings of a democracy even in its pre-colonial history, I would have to say it is Bharat. And I'll give an example for this and I'll explain why I say this. I think we as a civilization can teach the rest of the world the concept of diversity. We don't need lessons on diversity from anyone. So there's a popular saying that India as a country is so diverse that every 10 kilometers the language changes or the dialect changes and the culture keeps changing. And that is the degree of diversity in this land or in Bharat. And it's not something that we have gotten used to because of DEI trainings or diversity trainings. It's something that we take for granted, it's something that we grew up with. So whether someone has a beard without a mustache or a mustache without a beard or a pugly doesn't make a difference to us as long as they are in the same place. The fundamental civilizational imperative has been to live and let live. Such being the case, the innate tendency to coexist without conflict, the innate tendency to respect diverse opinions, diverse faith systems, diverse cultures, and diverse approaches to life are, according to me, the building blocks of a democracy. They are the key condition precedents or essentials for a democracy. Therefore, Bharatiya civilization is fundamentally comfortable, compatible, and conducive for democracy. Which is why, when we were put together as a modern nation state, we are an ancient civilization but a modern nation state. All the doomsday sayers who predicted the end of Bharat within a decade or so, they were applying their European experience to Bharat. Because they cannot seem to handle language wars. We have managed to actually keep thousands of languages alive and together within the four corners of one state, of one nation state. The ride has not been hunky-dory and it has been far from stable. But it also shows that it is a fundamentally resilient civilization and a robust democratic, let's say, apparatus, which has managed to keep this nation state together as opposed to splitting at the seams. We are, for all practical purposes, a continent that masquerades as a country. We are not a subcontinent, we are a continent. In terms of sheer scale and size and sheer diversity of experience that people have to offer, it is a continent. There is a reason why I believe that Devatas reside in Bharat. Because I don't think any other country could have pulled off the miracle that we have in the last 75 years in terms of the democratic miracle. Because for the rest of the world it's a miracle. For the rest of us, at least as far as Bharatians are concerned, since we have always existed as a civilization of the state or a civilization of one civilization, it was not difficult for us to come together to form this modern nation state. Nobody was asking whether it makes sense for the Gujarati and the Telugu to live under the same government as part of the same union. These questions were never asked. Because language or language barriers, according to me, are fundamentally superficial, at least within the civilization. In my view, and I say this with some degree of responsibility and having done some degree of research on this, Bharatiya civilization, on the face of it, is a federal civilization. What do I mean by federal civilization? That there is a superstructure which tries to keep the whole together without swallowing the individuality of the components. And the components are also aware that as much as they have an individual identity, they cannot completely separate themselves from the larger picture. That dharmic unity, that civilizational unity, is responsible for this federal structure. What this means is, while there are local rivers which feed local people, there is a Ganga that is trying to feed as many rivers as possible across the board. That broadly sums up the Bharatiya civilization experience. Which also means we have tried to accommodate as many viewpoints as possible, as many faith systems as possible, even those which are diametrically opposite to each other, under the condition that you prove your point through argument, but not through the sword. Convince the audience that you have the correct position or you have cracked the code through moksha, and that yours is the shortest path from this life to the other. And if the audience accepts, you don't need to say anything further. Prove your point in the court of public opinion, as opposed to raising the sword. That process of synthesis and the process of argumentation has fundamentally characterized the Indian experience. Which is why sometimes you see that one particular point of view has the upper hand, sometimes the other particular point of view has the other hand, or the upper hand, and that cycle will continue. But the fundamental rule will be that you will not resort to violence to prove your point of view. When you choose to resort to violence, the one thing that you do is that you pit yourself against the fundamental red line that we have drawn in the sand as a civilization. And that is the only time you pit yourself against the rest of the communities or the rest of the groups altogether. So long as that does not happen, there is no problem whatsoever. I'll give you the best possible example that comes to mind. There are two examples. The examples of the Zoroastrians and the examples of the Jews. Both of them who came as refugees to our land. By most yardsticks and benchmarks, from dietary restrictions to what they hold dear and what they worship, they are fairly distant from mainstream Bharatiya civilization and Sanskriti. Perhaps the Zoroastrians could claim to be closer to us because it is assumed that it is a part of the Vedic sect that moved away at some point. But you cannot say that of the Jews. At the very least, they are much more distant to the Indian stream or the Indian Sanskriti compared to the Zoroastrians. Perhaps Zoroastrians could be seen as Mitra worshippers, and therefore they could be closer to us. To the extent that what we hold dear, they don't hold dear. Cow is dear to the Hindu, but it is not dear to the Jew. And that has not stopped Bharat from opening its arms and its doors to people who were persecuted. And that's perhaps the only jurisdiction of the world where the Jews have never suffered any kind of anti-Semitic attacks, any kind of vandalism with respect to their places of worship. That speaks volumes of our ability to accommodate those identities which perhaps don't emanate from our land, which have nothing to do with us, and whose values could be diametrically opposite to us. If that is not a society that is conducive to democracy, I fail to understand which one can. So surely we as a country don't need, pardon the language, lectures from others on diversity or democracy. My suspicion is, when we start doing well economically, some people need a stick to beat us with. And inevitably it happens to be the democracy index. or the freedom of speech index. I can't think of a single society where the values of the largest community, the majority community, are frequently challenged, critiqued, ridiculed, and mocked without any consequences whatsoever. Whether that's good or bad is a different issue altogether. But that happens on a regular basis. If that society cannot be upheld as the epitome of maximum amount of free speech that is afforded to everybody else under the sun, then I don't understand what is free speech absolutism. If people live under the fear that they cannot criticize the values and the faith or the culture of the majority community, then perhaps we'll have something to say. But if that's not the case, and I think over the last 75 years, the experience has been quite the opposite. Surely we don't need lectures on free speech. 3, my sense is the journey that we have covered between 1991 and 2025 in terms of economic liberation, or let's say the liberalization of the economy, if we had started doing this in 1947 itself, the questions of culture that we are asking of ourselves today, we'd have started asking these questions in at least 1970s. Let me explain why I say this. अगर घर में खाना नहीं है, you're not going to sit and bother about culture. Right? The first job is to address livelihood before you start thinking of culture. So we have started asking questions of reclamation of culture and civilization in 2014 or thereafter because we have achieved a certain degree of economic prosperity or at the very least economic stability and confidence. Which means if this journey had started in 1947, applying the very same, let's say, logic from 1991 to 2025 or 2014, give or take another 10 years, by the 30th year of independence, we'd have started asking questions of civilization and civilization by the 1970s or 75 at the very least. What this tells you is economic prosperity opens the door for soft power. It opens the door for cultural reclamation. It makes a lot of things happen and possible. It opens the door for self-reliance. It opens the door for expansion of our interests and our strategic presence and reach. And Bharat as a society or as a country has never believed in an isolationist approach, where it chooses to operate as an island which does not transact with the rest of the world. Japan perhaps had a period of isolation until the Meiji Restoration period began, where it chose not to interact with the rest of the world because it believed that the interests from the rest of the world would pollute and corrupt its native culture. Until what they call the Meiji Restoration period began, when they opened their doors for foreign trade, they were completely isolated. Their borders were completely closed. You can't think of a single example in Bharat's history where it has refused to interact with people. What does it tell you about Bharat? Bharat has operated with a certain degree of civilizational confidence, wherein it believes that merely because you transact or interact with other cultures, it will result in the subversion or, let's say, the extinction of its culture. We don't operate from that kind of paranoia. We are that confident. And that comes with the fact and the conscious knowledge that if not the oldest, we are among the oldest civilization in the world. And the best part is, even after coming to the West, the diaspora, the Indian diaspora, continues to be proud of its roots, continues to keep its connections alive, and brings that culture here. Which means the diaspora, which we should have expected to give up its roots, especially if they come at a time when Bharat was truly poor, they should have been completely dazzled by the prosperity of the West, and they should have embraced the culture of the West, and they should have converted to the faith of the West. If they did not do so, what does it say about the strength of the civilization? It's much more possible and it's easier for you to be confident of your identity in 2025. Put yourself in the shoes of the generation of the 1960s and 70s, which came here with practically nothing. So I would want this community to recognize the contribution and the confidence of the first entrants in this land who have done well for themselves without giving up their fundamental identity as Bharatiyas. The struggles that they have withstood and undergone in the interest of providing a better life to their children to ensure the stability of their education and whatnot, I think has to be discussed. And I don't think that has happened often. Maybe you should consider recognizing it, you should consider recording it and talking about it as much as possible. Because when we sit back in Bharat, we assume that you've always had it great here. We don't know the struggles that you've gone through here. We still don't know what are your local challenges. So maybe that kind of cross-pollination is important. 3, while I think Bharat will go places, it will still take some time, and there's a good reason for it. And I think this is perhaps the best aspect of Bharat's growth story. We have not followed the Russian example of creating gulags, where we created enforced workers, so that we could catch up with the West in terms of material prosperity. Because when you do that, the society combusts, it loses its sense of identity. You're creating a pressure cooker without a safety valve. Okay? I suspect China has committed the very same mistake. Which is why, in the absence of constant relentless growth, China as a society has no purpose for its existence. Because you've completely deprived that society of its cultural moorings altogether. And they have to recreate and remake bits and pieces of their culture. So much so that your growth story had so many cultural revolutions and leaps, which are hell-bent on destroying the visible and the invisible symbols of their culture. That's the Chinese story. Coming to the story of the West, while it has managed to put together a fantastic, let's say, model of prosperity, I'm not sure that model has not come at the expense of property, namely nature and environment. Therefore, today global climate change and the discussions around climate change are significantly triggered by the continuous pursuit of the Western model of growth. Because I don't think it is sustainable. I'll give you a simple, let's say, math test in the sense. If the very same consumption and, let's say, material patterns of the West were to be followed by 1.4 billion people in India, do you really think either Bharat or the rest of the world has the resources to cater to that kind of consumption patterns? No, it does not. It certainly does not. So what does this mean? Bharat will have to make sure that its economic prosperity continues to lift millions of people from poverty, but in a manner that is not penny-wise and pound-foolish, to put it in the local language, which does not commit the mistakes of the Western model, and which does not resort to the Russian model of complete state control, wherein you have a significant amount of impetus for private innovation, for private investment, with some degree of state oversight on the consequences and implications of private innovation on nature and the larger picture. That, I think, would be the perfect balance between the state and the society. The simpler example to give would be, if the traffic signal were to control every twist and turn that you take, you will never be able to drive. But if you drive completely without a traffic signal in place, then your whim and fancy will prevail over public safety. So we have to find an economic model that does justice to our individual creative energies and larger public health concerns and public interest. In that sense, in my view, history has finally provided Bharat with a fantastic opening in that portal of time, wherein it can redefine metrics of development, redefine democracy in the Indian way or the Bharatiya way, redefine free speech in the Bharatiya way, and present its own definitions, which can be a role model for the rest of the world. Because I see Bharat as a microcosmic representation of the rest of the world, given its size and scale and diversity. Culturally, we may be different, but the principle of coexistence that we have placed before the world for generations, for centuries, for millennia, continues to hold valid. Finally, I do believe that I said this yesterday at Leicester, and I'll say this again with no disrespect to the local community here. There was a time when Bharat needed you. Now you need Bharat more than Bharat needs you. And this is good news for you as well, which means the mothership is self-sufficient, is capable of taking care of its needs, and also has the ability to reach out and protect you in your crowded homelands. I think that's a fantastic situation to be in. Therefore, our job here as the diaspora, and considering the fact that the West is broad-minded enough to give credit to them to accept dual identities, to accept dual nationalities, without insisting that you give up your roots altogether or do not celebrate your culture in public spaces, the credit for that goes to the West. And when there are examples of several countries in the world where it's not possible, you must give credit to this country and similarly to this country. To the best of my understanding, there has never been a state policy preventing you from constructing your places of worship. There's never been a state policy of preventing you from celebrating your festivals or wearing your visible symbols of your religion and identity in public spaces, whether it's workspaces or otherwise. If anything, they have perhaps gone the other way to accommodate all sorts of identities, to take advantage of their Udarvadi nature. Right? We don't need to be in competition with those who are in the race to the bottom, who want to take advantage of such a situation. Be grateful, be respectful, certainly abide by the system. But let the system not take you for a ride and make sure that the system knows that you're not first generation immigrants anymore. And therefore have an active investment in the local society, its growth, so that they know that you mean well. That this is not an attempt at some kind of hostile takeover. We are here to exist peacefully, to protect our spaces with dignity, and also to be of use and impact to the mothership as much as possible. My only suggestion would be that the Indian diaspora must evolve its own response mechanisms through institutions like FISI, through organizations like FISI and other like-minded organizations, to counter the malicious propaganda that the usual suspects resort to here, either to affect your local interests or to affect Bharat's interests. They may have overlaps, but those interests are not necessarily the same all the time. Because you have certain local challenges and there are certain interests of Bharat. Where they meet, but where they don't, you will also have to find your own response mechanisms. In that regard, I would request the next generation of the Indian diaspora to participate and contribute to institutions and movements like FISI as much as possible and be proactive. There is no point in trying to race after horses which are bolted from the stables. You will not be able to do it. And there is no point in constantly reacting to a situation. You have to be proactive so that the people here know who you are as a culture, as a nationality, and your own rich lived experience as a civilization. So I'm going to make a suggestion which I've made in the US and I've said it in Leicester as well. If your children are interested in pursuing a career in the humanities, please give them the free hand to do so. Give them the ability to pursue it because it is the humanities which is being weaponized against the Bharat story. And my hunch is, or perhaps my strong belief is, that weaponization will only increase as Bharat rises. You will be the subject of more vicious attacks, where everything that you stand for and hold dear will be called into question and ridiculed and mocked. And therefore, perhaps time has come for the diaspora to stay within the bounds of the law and still protect its own interests within the bounds of the law, and find partners in state establishments who are willing to partner with you, to understand your point of view and to protect your spaces. So as much as you must have a significant investment in the private sector here, your investment in the public apparatus, the state apparatus, is equally important. So I welcome every entrant into the public space here who is vying for a public position, either it's be it councillorship or mayorship or whatnot. I think it's a fantastic move. More power to you. And I hope the community stands behind you and supports you with material resources and human resources and gives you the courage of conviction and confidence to represent your interests at the highest levels possible in this country. We should not be orphan voices. You are not civilizational destitutes for sure, but you should not be local destitutes as well. So kindly find a way to invest, have a skin in the game, and engage with such organizations to the best of your abilities, so that you don't repent not having done so at the 11th hour when the problem is knocking at your doors. Then it's too little, too late. You still have time, you still have the numbers. Please make sure that at the very least, you preserve your existing numbers and if possible, increase those numbers. Surely you don't need state support for increasing your numbers. Perhaps what you can consider doing is create institutional mechanisms to support those families who want to have more than 2 children. In terms of taking care of basic educational facilities, what is important is that you create that safety net through institutional mechanisms, which is what has been fundamentally lacking for Indian communities. You have several disparate organizations which reinvent the wheel, but one umbrella organization or one umbrella safety net, where all these organizations pool their resources to cater to a common need. Perhaps that is one synthetic or syncretic engagement that is still missing. Because when there are too many organizations, what happens is the resource pool is limited, and therefore every organization will vie for its own share in the piece or it's in the pie. If the pie grows, it's a different issue, but if not, that's what will happen. So you have to try and find a way to create more voices without there being an unnecessary conflict for resources or race for resources, and you should find a way to work with each other. Because if institutional egos and individual egos prevail, then the first casualty will be community interest. Operate with that sense of reality. We can all have our differences in terms of language, region, or whatever it is. Those are material only in outside of Indians. And therefore, for someone who looks at you, he doesn't care what language you speak. Whether you speak Kannada or Tamil, it doesn't make a difference to him. It doesn't make a difference whatsoever. They look at your complexion, they look at where you come from. Fortunately, they finally know you're Indians and not our neighbors. That is one significant change after all these years of existing here. Finally, you know, we are not the P word, we are the proud P word. Okay?
So I say again?
We are not the P word, we are the proud P word. So, let's take it further from there and let them understand how are we not just different in terms of nationality, but even qualitatively and culturally how are we different. Let them understand. So, with this brief opening submission of a lawyer, I would request the jury to open its questions.
Points, as I mentioned, some personal and some about India's democracy. So I would like to start asking, what are the key factors that have contributed to India's democratic stability and resilience?
A constitutionalist will tell you it is the constitution. A civilizationist will tell you it is the civilization. And there's a reason for it. I doubt if 50 kilometers away from Delhi anybody knows the Sea of Constitution. It's not as if people are actually roaming around with a book in their hand, a document in their hand. Samvidhan ye kehta hai. Nobody says that, right? And it's not as if they're all robots following up.
which tells you what are the rules of the game which all of us will abide by and operate within. But very little credit has been given to the fact that our innate tendency to be bound by the law of karma, the fear of karma, and therefore we have been largely peaceful. We don't give enough credit. I've said this in previous engagements as well. There's a reason for it. I don't know how many people have been to Chandni Chowk. Okay, fine. The floating population of the place on any given day is at the least 500,000 minimum. And if you wish to, let's say, man that place with police forces, at least half of Delhi's police must be there. If someone wants to create mischief in that place, given the amount of information that's available on the internet to create explosives, on a daily basis they'll have something or the other going off. Apply that logic to the entire of Bharat. Do you truly believe that the police force that Bharat has is sufficient for the per capita population that we have in Bharat? I don't think so. Right? Not possible at all. If that is the case, while you may have individual cases which may shake your conscience or stir your conscience, compared with the scale of the population, it will always be negligible, minuscule compared to what is in other places. Even in the best of American cities, I've been asked not to venture out after 7:30 for the fear of mugging. I can't think of too many cities in India, or even semi-urban spaces or rural spaces, where you have to think on these lines. Some states previously had some of these reputations primarily because of the administration in place. But left to themselves, by and large, people are not like that. There is a very clear, ingrained, generational fear of the karmic consequence of a terrible act. It's not as if everybody understands karma. It's something that they take for granted. You don't need to understand how a mobile phone works for you to be able to use the mobile phone. Similarly, the fear of karma is something that has been passed on to them, saying, don't do this, it will come back to bite you. To my mind, that impulse is the single biggest reason for the success of Indian democracy. And look at the neighborhood around us. Look at the neighborhood around us. It's not the presence of the constitution that has saved Bharatiya democracy, because even Pakistan has a constitution. Bangladesh has a constitution. Sri Lanka has a constitution. China less and better. Right? Considering that, so if the presence of a document was a guarantor of democracy, well, the document can be created in every jurisdiction. What ensures the people's adherence to it? There must be fundamental willingness to it. So to me, as long as you put faith in people, a bad document can still lead to good outcomes. But if you don't put faith in people, a fantastic document can still lead to creation of a pack of scoundrels. Okay? So, I'm not saying therefore we don't need a document. We need a document to know what is the general direction in which we are going. What are the basic rules that all of us have agreed upon by way of a social contract? What is it that we have promised to not do to each other? You need that document to tell you that in place. Okay? For the better part of its existence, Bharat has operated without a written constitution, on the basis of the knowledge of the Smritis and the Shrutis and the Shastras, which are passed on through gurus. That is what has actually taken the society forward. So now what we are trying to do is preserve the space of the guru as well as the state of the document. That is the balance that we have struck. Which also tells you that as a society, we don't fear modernity, and we don't think modernity will swallow our traditions and our way of life. We think it's possible for both to coexist. Both of these impulses are important for the existence and the continued survival of the Indian nation state since 1947, which is the successor state of the Bharatiya civilization. That's how I see it.
Well, this is my favorite question. I was so keen to ask you this, and I'm sure many of our audiences would also be.
I'm married, I have only one wife.
So we have got to know all about Saiji in front of us. So well, my question was something beyond that. Okay. So well,
I say this because I've been thrown this question. I think the ring is not doing its job.
and I'm sure many of you have got the answers. You know,
This is
any
not
ladies
cool,
over
it's
here.
Yes, go on.
Okay, so you have pursued a mechanical engineer from Anna University.
Yes.
And then later graduated with bachelor's degree in law from IIT Kharagpur.
Fortunately.
So why was this change? Did you find machines are too silent and predictable, hence moved in law where everything talks back?
No, so point is, as a Tambram Southern family, we have produced mechanical engineers for 3 generations, so literally we know nothing beyond the nuts and bolts. It just so happens that I too pursued it for the simple reason that my larger goal was to become an aerospace engineer. That was the preparation. It just so happens that I hadn't done well enough for me to take up aerospace engineering in my undergrad. So to put it in the language of our cuisine, mechanical engineering is like rice which can be mixed with everything under the sun. Okay, so the hope was you pursue that in undergrad so that you can do your master's in aerospace engineering. And that's what I was preparing for. My final year project was on the very same lines. I had also secured a sponsored master's from IIT Kanpur, which I kept on board as plan B. I was preparing for a career in Georgia Tech. All of this was going on. Then destiny takes over. Because by that time, in my generation, as part of my stint on my engineering campus, I had sufficiently weathered a lot of hostility for my open positions on the Bharatiya identity and the civilizational identity. Physical attacks, jibes, remarks, whatnot, everything under the sun. And I'm the product of the 90s, which means I've seen 92, I've seen 99, before that I've seen 93, I've seen 2001, I've seen 2008. And therefore, at some stage, I wanted to ask myself, am I going to be the person who reads the Hindu newspaper and says, this country is orthodox? Either you participate in the conversation or you comment on the conversation. I certainly did not think I wanted to comment on the conversation. I felt I had what it takes to contribute to the conversation meaningfully and take it forward. And it just so happens that sometimes I think even if you want something, unless the universe conspires, it may not happen. And honestly speaking, coming from a low middle class Tamil family, law was remotely not an option. Because if you aspire for law, you are smoking the pot. Okay? You're basically looking at engineering, fantastic return on revenue, quick return on investment, followed by medicine, thoda expensive, but theek hai paisa, maybe theek hai. 3 after that would be commerce. The best part is, for each of these, the matrimonial market is decent. Okay? Law, it is not. The black sheep with the black coat and vice versa. So it was not remotely an option at all. I seriously consider a career in civil services in the final year of engineering. I wanted to prepare for it, except that I realized that my candor and outspokenness may not hold me in good stead in the system. So cracking the examination is not the same as surviving the system. Right? So I said, be realistic. And the one degree I never wanted to pursue because I could never understand its worth was the MBA degree. Okay, so I said, I will never do it in my life. That left me with only a master's in engineering, and beyond that I had no knowledge of it at all. Because the exposure was very limited on the humanities front. It just so happens that I had gone for my final year paper presentation as part of my project in the I think in the 6th semester or the 5th semester to IIT Kharagpur. And in the inauguration of that Tech Fest or the symposium, the then director of IIT Kharagpur said that from 2006 onwards they were going to start a law program exclusively for engineers, doctors, and MBAs with a science background, and LLB with specialization in intellectual property rights. I took a look at the brochure. I said, okay, perhaps this is my way, and this is what I wanted to do. So when I asked my parents and I mentioned it, we had multiple roundtable conferences. And my
phone was checked for my choice of friends. In those days, you had the Nokia 3300, the brick that you could throw at people and kill. And they went through those messages and they said there is something wrong. Tumhari sangat mein koi problem hai. So I said I'm not in kusangat at all. I know what I want to do. This is what I will do. And fortunately, Uttand is my basic character. So I said, come here on high water. This is what I will do. So if you stand your ground, eventually the world will reorganize itself around you. So I said, I am not moving from here. And fortunately, my mother supported me first, and then my father jumped in because I think that is the order of priority. And that worked to my advantage. And when I entered law school, my Atma finally entered Sharir. I realized I've come home, this is my place, this is my Shanti. Even when my parents had such fears, Ladki kaun dega? One. Two, do you want to be that fellow who's wearing mismatched flip-flops carrying files for a senior? After having aspired for aerospace engineering, your cousins will be in America, they will be in California, what will you do? Well-meaning concerns for most parents, I'm not going to run them down because that's how they see it and that's what they've grown up with. They're saying this from a place of concern, not because they don't want you to have the best in the world. If anything, it's the opposite. So, I told them, I'd rather do this than sit in California or even London for that matter and then wonder why am I not part of the India story. This FOMO feeling that Mr. Sabir Bhatia is going through right now. Because all these years he took no interest in the India story. Now that the India story is a cool story, he wants to tell India, I will tell you from America what you should do. We're like, we don't need the lectures, we know what to do. Okay? We have reached where we have without you, we will continue to do it. So I wanted to contribute to it. And most importantly, I did believe that our civilizational position suffered from an acute paucity of articulate voices presenting our position with confidence, knowledge and conviction. And I said it's time we did that because selling your story is half the battle won and Pakistan knows it. Yeah. Right? So therefore, I wanted to be a part of that. Fortunately, it just so happens that the opportunities that have come my way, thanks to the kind people who decided to give me the opportunity in my profession and subsequently outside of the profession, has paved the way to all of this. And the one thing you realize when you go along is no journey is a solo act. And I must therefore say that whatever I have managed to do is the product of contributions of several people around. My only thing that I take credit for is the decision that I took and start with. So that I decided to go ahead with, and that I think has paid off significantly.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us. And now we have got a question from audience, from Harshita ji. So the question is, what is your advice to parents, how we can guide our children to represent Bharat when they face reflection of challenges, conflicts with Bharat faces with other countries, and you mentioned briefly in your talk as well.
The broader question I think is, or the broader issue is, children don't pay attention to what you say, they pay attention to what you do. So, they focus on what you do and then they look for hypocrisy. And that becomes their weapon to beat you with. And you hand over the weapon to them in oodles, on a thali, saying, rakho beta, rakho. And they use it to their advantage. So perhaps before you go after the children, you should go after the parents. And here, maybe as a suggestion to Hindu parents here or in general Indian parents here, some fantastic initiatives have come about in the West where they are trying to give tools to Indian parents so that they are in a position to impart cultural values and civilizational values to the children so that they know where they come from. I am not sure if there are any such initiatives here. If there are, you don't need to learn from America. But if there aren't, you must seriously consider emulating and replicating those initiatives to suit your local needs. When you see your parents actively taking an interest in the India story or the Bharat story, actively championing it, participating in community making sure that you stand up and make yourself count when it comes to contribution, material or otherwise. That is when they take that interest. Otherwise, we will produce people who ended up giving that speech in MIT recently, right? And they will look for all sorts of causes to defend except the cause of their own people. These are the people who I call rent a cause activists, which is they are constantly looking a cause to outrage over, except for the cause that is right under their nose. In that sense, they are Deepaks of a different kind, not my kind. Okay? So, we have to understand that the mind is a vessel in which brooks no vacuum. If you don't fill it with your thoughts, it could be filled with garbage. And therefore, as a parent, understand that the phase of independence will come later. But in the formative years, you can't let them take a decision on their own and leave it to their own devices. Because you have to proceed on the assumption that they don't know enough. It's not wrong to say that a teenager doesn't know enough. Maybe it could be an anti-woke statement to me, but I'm not woke, so I will say it. So according to me, in the formative years, it falls upon the parents to impart as much as possible and then give them the ability to decide or the freedom to decide when they come of age. When you do that, you're hoping to give them the basic mechanisms to deal with situations, especially situations which relate to their culture, when questions are asked of them on school campuses and college campuses. Because you can't be everywhere to defend them in those spaces. So try and give them the skill sets. And it goes back to the fundamental point that if a Hindu parent or an Indian parent must not find themselves alone, we need to create community initiatives. Again, goes back to my point of supporting these initiatives. The one thing that you never want to be in, or the place that you don't wish to be in, is to find yourself waging a lonely battle, either for your culture or for the future of your child. And that place can be fundamentally depressing when you realize what is it that I give them by way of a simulated experience about Bharat. You can't do that individually. It has to be a community initiative. A community initiative is not a communal initiative. There's a difference between the both. So, as long as and as much as you strengthen your community institutions here, take it from me, you're only bound to benefit from it. So, your investment in these institutions is not an academic investment, it is an investment in the continuity of culture in your family. In your own family, to make sure that your children and their children have something to hold on to remind them of who they are and where they come from. Because with every generation, the need to connect will necessarily come down because they don't have a cultural memory and they don't have lived experience except for being tourists. And which is not enough. And that investment, if it has to continue, you'll have to make it much more meaningful. And this is not enough if only your organizations do it. I think, and I've said this to those who bother to hear in the Indian state, that we must actively engage with the diaspora and conduct what Israel does, which is birthright trips, where they go back to their country and they get a guided tour of the country so that they get to see what the land is about, as opposed to being fed stereotypes about the land through vested, motivated third parties. Let them see what the land is about, let them spend some time there, let them see that their country continues to take an active interest in them by investing in taking them back. And I think we should come to a point where the diaspora, which has gotten used to living here, also sees some value in having a second establishment back home. When that happens, there is a real incentive and investment back home without having to give up this place. The choice that you cannot expect them to make is to give this up. If it happens on its own, that's a different issue altogether. But if that doesn't happen, what are we doing to make sure that they at least invest back home concretely? So that I think is perhaps one thing that we consider. Yeah.
I think a good take-home message for all the parents here. Okay, so our next question is from number Namrita BDG. Question is, post-Operation Sindoor, is India the next rising power? If yes, how can we create a positive impact on the world?
See, Operation Sindoor, apart from the objectives that it was meant to achieve, which it has achieved in terms of its military objectives and deterrent objectives, has sent a larger message that this is not the Bharat of 1962. To those who have to understand that message, the message has been sent. We are not a pushover anymore. That has been conveyed in crystal clear terms. Because while on the face of it, the belligerence of this particular limited encounter where Pakistan and Bharat, I'm using Pakistan because Pakistan was the aggressor, we were merely responding. The actors behind the scenes were multiple nations as far as Pakistan is concerned. And we managed to send a message to all of them through our attacks on Pakistan, our responsive attacks on Pakistan. Now this is crucial in my view because Shakti Pradarshan becomes important for you to be able to pursue prosperity. And this was not a Shakti Pradarshan that we did on our own, it was forced upon us. We never wanted to undertake it in the first place, but I think Pakistan was literally asking for it and begging for it. So we had to give it back. Okay? 3, at a time when we expected a lot of people to stand up and throw their weight behind Bharat, and they did not. Bharat finally showed the confidence to say, I will go it alone, I don't care. 3, that also shows that Bharat has invested significantly in creating its own internal strengths on the manufacturing front and whatnot. This is brilliant news. And I think the world was taken by surprise that Bharat could deliver. All these days people only spoke of the Iron Dome exercise. They didn't realize that we have an Akash Tir. Right? And not only has it opened up a market, it has also told people that when it comes to cutting edge technologies, which are perhaps tested in the most, let's say, trying of circumstances and situations, we have what it takes to deliver the goods. 3, as a people, I think I'm very happy that India has finally stood up for itself. And it has done so without expecting support from the world. And 4, India now knows who its friends are and who aren't. It knows very clearly where we stand, and it will now mentally prepare for walking this path solo until it reaches the peak. Because if you look at it historically, almost every country which decides to reach a certain phase of economic stability and then goes further from there will be subjected to a series of vicious attacks by its competitors and detractors. So we have entered that phase. In astrological terms, we would call it the phase of Mangal. Which means there will be war, but it also brings good because it is Mangal. So, I hope that apart from people back home, we also have the diaspora step up to participate in this India story now and contribute to it materially and also informationally. It's very important. The voices which are the closest to the local ears are yours. So you have to try and convey that message as much as possible to the people you have access to, so that they know that Bharat has never ever resorted to wanton use of force, at least externally. And Bharat has always operated as a responsible nation, as a responsible society and civilization. And it has no interest in pursuing a policy of expansionism. It is only saying those territories which were taken from us forcibly will be taken back. Beyond that, we have no interest whatsoever. And we are interested in addressing the world's problems together, because we have the brains and we have the intent, whether it's climate change or otherwise. So I'm very happy with what has happened. I just wish that the narrative war was fought with greater clarity But I think the recent, let's say, spate of delegations that we have sent abroad to a slew of countries is a stitch in time and hopefully delivers the goods. Perhaps something more could have been done before that. Be that as it may, I am not going to nitpick because the central objective was to send a message to that rogue state, which I think has been done.
Next question is from Shreyans Mishraji. It's about your book. While your first book covers a lot of framework to recognize decoloniality, how can decoloniality practically be implemented with present constitution and legal framework? If not, then what reforms are needed in constitution to root back to Indic practice?
Decolonization is not a message to go back in time. It is to understand that thanks to our experience of being colonized, we are conditioned in a particular way and we have certain internal biases which we don't recognize when we look at our own culture and civilization. So decolonization is less of a constitutional exercise and more of a mental exercise, where you're basically asking people to understand what you think of your country, what you think of your civilization, what you think of your own people and your ancestors is significantly a product of and directly traceable to the education system that you have inherited since 1835. And therefore we are saying, address those biases so that you have a better sense of self and a better sense of your own civilization. That is where it starts. Assume for a moment that people free themselves of these kind of biases. Even if you don't change the constitution, it makes no difference. Because the goal is to address people, which is the target audience, not the document. If people feel that they still need to change the document after having decolonized themselves mentally, that is a choice that they can make at that stage. But the goal doesn't start from the constitution. The target audience is first the people. So this is less of a legal exercise or a political exercise and more of a social and a societal exercise, both at the collective level and at the individual level. Which means when people basically proceed to assume that sati as a practice was so prevalent that it required the intervention of the British man for him to abolish it and clamp down on it. That is such a vicious and malicious representation of Bharat when literature exists to first of all say, one, it was out of volition, and two, it was rarely present. If it was rarely present, for you to use that as the lens to look at an entire civilization, at an entire continent, is grave injustice and therefore motivated. Second, the word that we keep using, Juggernaut, where does it come from? It comes from Jagannath, fine, but do you know the context of it? So, a particular missionary, I don't wish to name the person, I've mentioned this in the book, specifically wants to vilify the Jagannath Yatra, wherein he says people are pushed under the wheels of the Yatra, of the Rath, to sacrifice their lives. This is the inhuman black system or the inhuman black culture that they follow. And in his correspondence, because the man could not pronounce Jagannath, he types it and spells it as Juggernaut, and that's how the infamous word has come about. So these are elements which are part of our casual conversations, the inherent biases within which we are not aware of. Therefore, decolonization is to unplug you from the matrix and give you the red pill so that you know, Baba, this is the truth of our civilization. So, at least don't be the mental slave who rehashes and repeats the inherited stereotypes from the colonizer with respect to your own civilization. So, that is the primary goal. And as long as the goal is achieved, to my mind, whatever happens from there on is a cosmetic exercise. As long as people know where they come from, they're confident of it, and I'm not saying celebrate everything that was evil or bad or whatever it is, at least accept it for what it was, in good measure, in bad measure, in the sense, the good part, the bad part, the ugly part, whatever they may be, try and accept it for what it is. At least least understand your own history on your own terms, as opposed to looking at it from a tourist or a colonizer's perspective. It's as bad or as good as, let's say, the tiger looking at itself through the eyes of the idiot who's standing outside the cage. Okay, the tiger, if you look at it from the tourist perspective, the person who's visiting, it may not exactly know its true potential. Okay? You look at yourself and look at yourself in your own terms. That's the primary goal, nothing beyond that. And I'm certainly not going to make the statement that decolonization means that reject everything which comes from the West. After all, the Upanishadic principle is accept good ideas wherever they come from. I'm only saying, first look for those good ideas within, and then you accept it if you don't have them from the rest of the world. That is the only missing part of the statement.
Next question is from Nishaji regarding temples. She is asking, you have been painstakingly working towards freeing our temples. So what are the obstacles? Have you come across any obstacles at all?
I have not been painstakingly working towards it. That's the first correction. I am interested in that as a practicing Hindu and as a practicing constitutional litigator. The reason why I have to spell this out is there are any number of people who have been working for this cause for over 15 to 20 years who have not got the recognition. It just so happens that because I have delivered lectures on social media, people end up associating me with the cause. But I am not the face of the cause. I am certainly not the face of the litigation. Coming to the question of when will this be addressed, honestly speaking, this can be addressed in one go. If the government of India chooses to. We don't need to fight this battle in courts at all. Control over places of worship and religious institutions and charitable institutions comes within what we call as the concurrent list, which means state governments have power over the subject and the central government also has power over the subject. And if the central government chooses to exercise its power, then the power of regional states will have to give way to central power. So if the government of India chooses to come out with a model legislation that empowers communities to control their own institutions, gives them greater control over the resources of their institutions, frankly speaking, we don't need to fight this battle on a daily basis in courts. And I'm not doing this on a daily basis in courts. On a daily basis in courts, I'm a commercial litigator. This is barely 10% of my dharmic commitment, nothing beyond it. Because I don't wish to be branded a temple litigator, and I think there has to be a broad basing of stakeholdership for people to jump into this particular thing. The cause is too big for one person to do it, and no one person should do it. So I do believe if somebody wants to address the issue, they can do it in less than a year. When institutions of other communities are subjected to basic rules of accountability and audit through what we call the Trusts Act, why aren't the very same legislations inadequate for Hindu institutions? That is the only question we need to ask. What more do you want over and above the very same controls which are there for the institutions of other community? And I think it's a fairly straightforward question to ask, which means the only option left is repeal all the existing temple legislations and say that the Trust Act shall apply. Or come out with a temple specific legislation which is shorter, which is crisper, and which gives more power and strength to the community. It is not at all difficult, but it's a question of whether there is political incentive, will and interest to act on the subject. Now, whether somebody has done it or not will prove whether they have had the interest to do it. How long will I have to overstay my welcome?
Are we okay for?
Yes. One more question? I'm fine with that.
You're okay, yeah. So,
The only thing is not available hour, so please go ahead.
so this next question is from everybody who is wearing this orange jumpers there, Deepak UK, their representatives. So they are asking, how do you see the reclaim of Krishna Janmabhoomi in Mathura being approved and achieved?
I think first we should recognize the stellar efforts of Vishnu Shankar Jain. He is one of the Indian He's a very good friend and colleague in the profession. At this point, there is a state that is operating. thanks to an unfortunate order of the Supreme Court. It's a question of when that stay is revisited before we can continue pursuing this particular cause and not limited only to this particular institution and go to other institutions as well. I honestly don't know, because unfortunately they don't teach astrology as part of law school, so I don't know. And usually there is a saying, there's a popular notice in Indian Railways, which is Gaadi aane ki sambhavna hai. Aayegi right? So I will say Bhune ki sambhavna hai, kab hoga mujhe nahi pata. I will make no such comment. I will not sign on a check which I can't cash and take to the bank. So I will only say, Ram will say, I have no idea. As far as efforts are concerned, we have put in the efforts. Now it is for the system to understand that this is not the ask of a few, this is the ask of the community itself. Here I can only say, typically even legal institutions and constitutional institutions will take your cause seriously only when you show seriousness. So let this become a people's movement. The message will reach the right places. Yeah.
Due to the time constraint, we will be taking this last question. Apologies if you're not, we couldn't, attend few more questions here, but I'm sure we will have to spend all like 24 to 48 hours to sit beside Deepak ji. Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't do that. So our next question is from Atul Javedi ji. He's asking, what is your opinion regarding recent Supreme Court's judge's directive to the President of India on time limit on bills?
Was it to the President or the Governor?
Action with the Governor.
See, that was an extremely case-specific direction. And see, it's like this. A constitutional position such as the role of the Governor has the duty to say yes or no in time. You have to separate two different issues here. One is the constitutional question, the other is the political question. Politically speaking, the answer will be different, and constitutionally speaking, the answer will be different. Considering the mischievous actors who are helming the state of Tamil Nadu, I completely understand where the governor's position comes from. Okay? These are people who pass resolutions to the effect that they will not respect national ethos, who heckle at the governor within the assembly, with zero respect for his office. The principle of public life is that even if you don't respect the individual, you must respect the office. And when elected representatives don't abide by that fundamental principle, that means you are being led by people who have zero respect for democracy or democratic institutions or constitution for that matter. So for such people, to expect constitutionality with respect to bills is mighty hypocritical. Be that as it may, when decisions have to be made and laws have to be passed, I think setting of time limits is not bad. Because if there is a certain silence in the constitution on that particular issue, it falls upon the court to answer that silence. That is the job of the judiciary, to interpret the document and give it a certain, let's say, applicability, to make it practical and make it feasible. Let's assume for a moment, if it were a different state altogether. Let's say there is an opposition appointed governor sitting in the state of Uttar Pradesh, who is sitting on bills being passed with the state of Uttar Pradesh. Would you not have a problem with it? You have a problem with it. The thing about the constitution is what you think you can do to others, others can do to you. So protect institutional integrity, because that is the only thing that gives you the ability to respond to any tyrant. You can't hope to be in power forever. And what if a loaded dice falls in the hands of the opposition? Then you are at the receiving end of the loaded dice. Right? Without airing too much about India's internal politics on a foreign platform, all I will tell you is how I would end it. Thank you.
I'm taking a liberty over here. I have a very interesting question. So one last question. So this is, if you would have, well, this is my question, so I didn't want you to go home without asking this. So if you would have any superpower, what would it be and how would it benefit India?
If I could have one superpower, I would ask for all superpowers. No, but honestly, I don't know how to answer that question.
She's asking for India.
I don't know. The dream of a despot, which is to control people's minds. Maybe that's the only way to handle it, particularly when you know for a fact that as much as democracy is celebrated, not everybody is good enough to vote, unfortunately. The right to vote sometimes, is in the worst of hands possible, which is the unfortunate reality, but that is how we work. Democracy works on approximations in the hope that the good people outweigh or outnumber the bad people or the idiots. But maybe we will have to revisit this in the longer run. And I think in general, the world over, people